Tene ta tanda tambo chenamba kankala tashikele shojutan. Tene ta te jesu tanda ngaranso ta tabu chu yege na ne tangbo lo chu.
First of all, good morning to you all. From within the four Dharmas of Gampopa, we have gone through the first, mind going to the Dharma, and the second, Dharma becoming a path. So now we turn to the third. The third is phrased, grant your blessing that for myself and all sentient beings, the path dispel bewilderment. The function of the path is to achieve a state where all that is to be abandoned has been abandoned, and ensuing upon that, all that is to be realized has been realized. So we can consider the result of the path from these 2 points of view. First, we consider the abandonment of all that is to be abandoned. And all that is to be abandoned can be summarized under the term bewilderment. When bewilderment has been dispelled or abandoned, then that which is to be realized is realized. So the third Dharma of Gampopa refers to the abandonment through the path of all that is to be abandoned, and the fourth one, bewilderment arising as wisdom, to the realization of all that is to be realized. Now, the actual practice of the path consists of 3 processes or stages, the first of which is hearing. That is followed by thinking, and then finally there is meditating. It is said the sign of hearing is to be peaceful and subdued. The sign of having meditated is to have few or no kleshas. Now, the absence of kleshas is what happens when bewilderment has been dispelled. But what do we mean by bewilderment? If we look at bewilderment in the context of the Buddha's first turning of the Dharma Chakra of the Four Noble Truths, then bewilderment has 2 aspects. The resultant aspect, which is the truth of suffering, and the causal aspect, which is the truth of the cause or origin of suffering. The resultant aspect consists of both the outer environment and its inner inhabitants. The outer environment being the 4 continents, Mount Meru and so forth. The inner inhabitants being the 6 types or 6 states of sentient beings. The nature of the experience of all of these beings is what is called the 3 sufferings. These are the suffering of change, and the pervasive suffering of the composite. The first of these, the suffering of suffering, is the experience of the sufferings within the 3 lower states, the hells, the preta realms, and the animal realm, as well as the sufferings that occur in higher states. For example, in the human realm, the experiences of birth, aging, sickness, and death. But if you ask, is the experience of all samsaric beings suffering and suffering alone? It is not, because sometimes beings experience states of happiness. For example, devas or gods and humans from time to time experience various forms of pleasure, comfort, and well-being. However, these states of pleasure or temporary happiness are impermanent, and therefore they change. For example, a deva of the desire realm will experience a great deal of pleasure during its existence, but at the end of that existence, the process of dying and the subsequent downfall to a lower state is a cause of tremendous suffering. So their previously enjoyable existence changes into one of great suffering. This change from happiness to misery is the second suffering, the suffering of change. Furthermore, as long as one remains within samsara, whether one's experience at any given moment is pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. What governs that experience is constant change. Change is impermanence, which has both a coarse aspect, the fact that things don't last forever, and a subtle aspect, that in every given moment, things are in a state of change rather than stasis. Because of this constant change, this constant impermanence, existence, samsaric existence, is characterized by what we call the pervasive suffering of the composite. Now, what we need, we being ourselves and everyone else as well, is to get rid of suffering. But if you ask, can you simply directly abandon suffering itself? The answer is no. The only way to get rid of suffering is by getting rid of its cause. And if you get rid of the cause of suffering, the result, the suffering itself, will automatically disappear. It is for that reason that the Buddha then went on to teach the truth of the origin or cause of suffering. The truth of the cause or origin of suffering has two aspects, and these are karma and kleshas. These two things or factors are said to be the causes or origins of suffering. That is to say, it is through the accumulation of karma that we come to suffer. Now, karma can be of any of three types. There is defiled virtuous karma, defiled unvirtuous karma, and undefiled virtuous karma. Defiled unvirtuous karma is the cause of samsaric suffering. Defiled virtuous karma is the cause of temporary states of pleasure or happiness within samsara, and undefiled virtuous karma is the cause of liberation from samsara. Therefore, this third type of karma, undefiled virtuous karma, is not considered to be part of the truth of the origin of suffering. The other two are. What we need to abandon immediately, of course, is defiled unvirtuous karma, that which is a cause of suffering per se. But ultimately or finally, we also need to abandon defiled virtuous karma, which is a cause of bewilderment in the form of samsaric happiness. Now, the cause of all defiled karmas, especially of defiled unvirtuous karmas, but also of even defiled virtuous ones, is the presence of kleshas. So therefore, the way to abandon these karmas is to abandon the kleshas that are their necessary motivation. Kleshas can be analyzed in different ways. We can say there are the three root poisons: attachment, aversion, and bewilderment, or the five, in which case we add pride and jealousy. Sometimes we talk about the 6 root kleshas and the 20 branch kleshas and so on. They can be subdivided greatly. How do we abandon them? We abandon the kleshas we abandon suffering by abandoning the kleshas, and as a result, the karmas, which are motivated by the kleshas, and as a result of that, the suffering which is produced by the accumulation of such karmas. So therefore, fundamentally, the dispelling of bewilderment through or by the path consists of the dispelling of the kleshas, which motivate the karmas, which form the cause of suffering. Now, in his great kindness, the Buddha taught in the various Dharma chakras many different ways to do this. Many different ways to abandon kleshas and therefore karma and thereby suffering. Fundamentally, we can divide these approaches into the lesser and greater vehicles. In the practice of the lesser vehicle, the principal way that the kleshas are abandoned is through meditating on the selflessness of persons. The reason for this is that the root of all kleshas is fixation on the personal self. Therefore, if this fixation is abandoned, all kleshas will be abandoned as well. However, if you ask, can you abandon the fixation on the personal self simply by resolving to do so? The answer is no. The only way it can be abandoned is by assiduously cultivating a discernment which directly recognizes the selflessness of persons. When that recognition is gained, then the fixation on the self disappears, therefore the kleshas disappear, therefore karma will not be accumulated, therefore suffering will not arise as a result. This is the achievement of the state of an arhat. From the point of view of the greater vehicle, this path, the path of a listener or shravaka, is regarded as temporary and as somewhat lesser. The greater vehicle can be divided into the causal vehicle of characteristics and the resultant vehicle of secret mantra. In the practice of the causal vehicle, one starts by recognizing that it is not enough simply to abandon one's own suffering, because all other beings are suffering as well. Therefore, the starting point of this vehicle is the generation of relative bodhicitta, which is the resolution to cause the abandonment of the suffering of all beings. And then one gradually cultivates absolute bodhicitta through meditation that is not only on the selflessness of persons, but on the emptiness of all things or all dharmas. Through realizing the emptiness of dharmas as well as the selflessness of persons, one comes to abandon not only the kleshas, but the two obscurations, the obscuration which is the kleshas and the cognitive obscuration as well. Thereby, one achieves not only liberation, but omniscient Buddhahood. And this is how the path dispels bewilderment in the practice of the causal vehicle of the Mahayana. The Mahayana of the causal vehicle is an extraordinary path, but it does not possess a great variety of methods. Essentially, the common path of the causal vehicle can only be traversed through the gradual accumulation of a great deal of merit and the gradual realization of dharmata. Therefore, this path takes a very long time. The supreme path is the resultant vehicle of secret mantra, the Vajrayana, which is distinguished from other paths in that it possesses a vast variety of methods. It is therefore through this path alone that one can, under ideal circumstances, achieve the state of unity, the state of Vajradhara, in one life and one body. Now, how do we actually practice? The tradition of all the root and lineage gurus is to principally take the Vajrayana as the essence of their path. So therefore, it is through the practices of the Vajrayana that we dispel bewilderment. The supreme methods of the Vajrayana are two. As you all know, Vajrayana practice consists of the generation stage and the completion stage. We begin Vajrayana practice by practicing the generation stage. Now, the generation stage has three aspects that correspond to the three roots: the gurus, who are the root of blessing, the yidams, who are the roots of attainment, and the dharmapalas, who are the roots of activity. In practicing the generation stage, we practice generation stage meditations concerned with or focused on each of these three roots, and in that way we begin to travel the path. Now, the first of these is the gurus, who are the roots of blessing. Although, of course, the Buddha is regarded himself as being the supreme Dharma teacher, we have no opportunity nowadays to meet the Buddha. It is thousands of years have passed since the Buddha passed away. From that point of view, we might regard ourselves as unfortunate, but from another point of view, we are not unfortunate at all, because we can practice exactly the same way as we could had we met the Buddha, even though we have not. And we receive instruction exactly the same as what we would have heard directly from the Buddha's mouth, although we did not hear his speech. The reason is that the root and lineage gurus repeat the Buddha's words, the Buddha's instructions, exactly as he taught them. It is for this reason that the gurus are the roots of blessing. Therefore, in some generation stage practices, we meditate upon the guru, which is generally called guru yoga. This can involve visualizing the root and lineage gurus present above your head or in the sky in front of you, and at the culmination of that, receiving the four empowerments from them, and so on. This is what we could call the common practice of guru yoga. The uncommon practice of guru yoga involves the meditation on particular gurus. For example, in the Karma Kagyu tradition, principal among these would be the guru sadhanas of Lord Marpa, Lord Milarepa, and Lord Gampopa, as well as the guru sadhana of the second Jalwan Karmapa, Lord Karmapakshi. With regard to Karmapakshi, although all Karmapas embody the same wisdom, each of them has a distinct mode or form of activity. Some have been great scholars, some have been great monastic leaders, and some have demonstrated the manner of being a Mahasiddha. Among the Karmapas, the second, Lord Karmapakshi, is principally renowned as having demonstrated the manner of being a Mahasiddha. So therefore it is regarded as having especially great blessing to meditate on and supplicate him. We also, however, practice another Guru Yoga called the Guru Yoga of the Four Sessions, which was composed by and is focused on the 8th Jalwan Karmapa, Lord Michu Dorje, and this is because of his extraordinary compassion and activity. We also practice Guru sadhanas focused on Guru Rinpoche, Guru Padmasambhava, because of his great kindness to the Vajrayana tradition. Guru Rinpoche is meditated on in a peaceful form, a wrathful form, and the secret form of the wisdom Dakini. In particular, the cycle of such teachings that we emphasize is that which was discovered by the Vidyadhara Gyatso Nyingpo, this cycle being called the embodiment of the three jewels, because of Gyatso Nyingpo's great connection with the Karma Kagyu tradition and because of the subsequent connection of this practice with that tradition. Because this cycle of practice was emphasized by the 9th Suttu Rinpoche, Pema Nyingje Wompo, and subsequently by Jongul Lodru Tai, we do practice it. In any case, all of these methods are generation stage practices focused on the gurus, the roots of blessing.
Tene ta te kendala nipa te ningudu tsawa yidam jinyamne nangulu yodala.
The second of the three roots is the yidams, which are the root of siddhi or attainment. Now, the instructions which Lord Marpa, the translator, received during his 3 journeys to India and spread, subsequently propagated in Tibet, remain unimpaired nowadays. And if we consider the words of Marpa himself about what he received, he said, "I have received the profound Tantra Hevajra and the quintessence Chakra Sambhara." So therefore, we can say that our Yidam practices are centered on these 2 traditions, the profound Tantra of Hevajra and the quintessence Tantra of Chakra Sambhara. In particular, we emphasize the latter, the cycle or Tantra of Chakra Sambhara. Now, Chakra Sambhara has 2 aspects to it. It can be practiced in the aspect of method or means, the father, Chakra Sambhara, or as the aspect of discernment, the mother, Vajrayogini. Of these 2, since it is principally the faculty of discernment on which we must rely, we emphasize the second, the practice of the mother, Vajrayogini. Therefore, we see that most of the gurus of the lineage have relied upon Vajrayogini as their principal yidam. Therefore, she is practiced in the outer, inner, and secret phases. We also, however, do practice the generation stage of the father, Chakra Sambhara. In general, probably one of the most important deities for the Vajrayana tradition as a whole, because of the need we have to generate love, compassion, and bodhicitta, is the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Because of his great importance, the Buddha taught various practices and various forms of Avalokiteshvara in all four tantras, the Kriya Tantra, Charya Tantra, Yoga Tantra, and Anuttara Yoga Tantra. There are forms of Avalokiteshvara with 1,000 arms and 1,000 eyes, forms with one face and 4 arms, and so on, many different ones. For example, when we do the Nyungne practice, meditating upon the 1,000-armed and 1,000-eyed Avalokiteshvara, this practice is rooted in the Buddha's teachings in the Kriya Tantra. When we meditate on the white Avalokiteshvara with one face and 4 arms, this is principally drawn from the Charya and Yoga Tantras. And when we meditate upon the red 4-armed form of this deity, known as Jina Sagara, or the Ocean of Victors, this is drawn from the Anuttara Yoga Tantras. Historically, the lineage of Jina Sagara was received by Milarepa's disciple Drechungpa in India, and then it gradually came down through lineage to Lord Karmapakshi, and therefore we practice it today as one of the principal yidams. So these are the generation stage practices of the second root, the yidams, the root of siddhi. Now what is meant by siddhi or attainment here? It means 2 types of attainment. The supreme attainment is the achievement of omniscient awakening, Buddhahood, what is called in the Vajrayana the 13th stage, the stage of a Vajra holder. But also, through the generation stage of the yidam, we can achieve common attainment, such things as the removal of obstacles to practice, the establishment of conducive conditions, and so on. So through the generation stage of the yidam, we dispel bewilderment. And we do so because bewilderment includes impure appearances, on the basis of which we generate impure perceptions and concepts and so forth. So through meditating upon the world as a pure realm and one's body as the body of the deity, one comes to dispel the bewilderment associated with impure appearances. And this is a way of dispelling bewilderment that causes one to achieve the 2 siddhis.
Tene ta te jendo zawa sunje sumba te tene ji zawa chujung re la. Tene tene ji zawa chujung te ta pe na lam drup tuk tsu.
The third root is the Dharmapalas, who are the roots of activity. The Dharmapalas are relied upon as guides and companions on the path, much as we rely upon the Sangha in general. In particular, we emphasize the wisdom Dharmapalas, or wisdom protectors, such as Gampopa of the Karma Kagyu tradition, the 4-armed Mahakala of the Kagyu tradition in general, and so on. There are many. And by relying upon these through their activity, we manage to dispel obstacles and establish conducive conditions and so forth. We principally rely upon these wisdom protectors who were actually taught by the Buddha himself in the various tantras. And by relying upon them, by entrusting our welfare to them, by supplicating them, we establish benefit not only for ourselves but for others as well. And this is also an aspect of the generation stage which serves to dispel bewilderment. The practice of the generation stage can involve all aspects, all 3 of these roots and so on, a complete tradition of practice, or it can also be the practice focused on only one of these. One can traverse the path through the generation stage of the Guru, the root of blessing, or the generation stage of the Yidam, the root of attainment, or the generation stage of the Dharmapala, the root of activity. Now, with regard to the last of these, in general, one could not use the practice of a common Dharmapala to traverse the path. However, the Mahakala Bernachen, being a wisdom protector taught in the Tantras themselves, is a wisdom being fit to be relied upon in this way. In the praise we say, although you never depart from the Dharmadhatu, you manifest in a wrathful form. Therefore, although Bernard Chen is regarded as a Dharmapala, he can be practiced as a guru, practiced as a yidam, or practiced as a Dharmapala. In any case, all of these practices of the three roots are aspects of the generation stage, which serves to dispel bewilderment. Now, how do you actually begin this practice? Initially, according to the traditions of the Siddhas, you must receive three things. These are the empowerment, which ripens, the instruction, which liberates, and the reading transmission, which provides support. The first of these is the ripening empowerments. Whether you are meditating upon the gurus, the root of blessing, the yidams, the roots of attainment, or the dharmapalas, the roots of activity, in order to do so, you definitely must initially receive the particular empowerment for the particular deity on which you are going to meditate. Now, as for what constitutes receiving empowerment, ideally, in the best cases, it means that during the empowerment ceremony, the disciple recognizes directly the wisdom which is the meaning of the empowerment. However, realistically, we'd have to say that it's not necessarily the case that's always going to happen. Even if you do not recognize the wisdom that is the empowerment's true meaning during the ceremony itself, by receiving the empowerment, you are still receiving the blessing of the lineage. Now, what happens when you receive this blessing? What happens is, for example, if up to that time you lacked faith, you will come to have more faith. If you lacked diligence, you will come to be more diligent. If you lacked an understanding of Dharma, you will gain an understanding of Dharma. The descent of blessing during an empowerment does not mean something like, for example, the possession by a spirit in the case of a trance medium, where you start shaking violently and act crazy. It's nothing like that at all. It refers to a change where the person comes to cultivate greater discernment, greater faith, and so on. In any case, in order to practice these things, we definitely initially need the empowerment which ripens.
Tene tatela tene wang shuna damsik sumur damsik sinki tela tene kapkapa kahi tragu.
Along with empowerments comes what is called samaya. And samaya scares many people because it's said once you receive an empowerment, you must keep that empowerment samaya. If you do not keep it, you are going to be reborn in lower states. And this is actually taught. But this common statement should not be regarded as something that is to be taken literally, but as a statement with a hidden intention. Think about the context. The primary responsibility of a guru is to get their disciples to practice Dharma. In order to get disciples to practice Dharma, one very good way is to tell them, you must keep this samaya or you are going to be reborn in lower states. This is an excellent way of getting people to practice. Now, if you ask, is this therefore a lie? It is not a lie. Think about what samaya is. Samaya means the words of promise you utter at the culmination of the empowerment. In other words, you make a promise. And having made a promise, you either abide by that promise or not. Well, what is the promise in this case? The promise is something like, I will practice such and such. So if you make that promise and then you do it, something tremendous has been achieved. In general, whenever you make a promise, you need to follow through. For example, let's say you promise to complete the 4 preliminary practices. Because you have promised to do it, you then do it. Now, had you not made that promise, had you not committed yourself in some way to doing those practices, you wouldn't do them. Also, if you commit yourself to doing them, if you promise to do those practices and then you don't, then the promise is pointless. the promise hasn't brought you anything or protected you in any way. So when it's said, if you don't keep Samaya, you're going to hell, this is not actually a lie. Because what does not keeping Samaya means? It means going on and continuing to engage in unvirtuous actions and avoiding or not getting involved with those virtuous actions to which you've committed yourself. So if you do that, if you continue to kill and so forth, to do all sorts of unvirtuous things, you are going to be reborn in lower states. You're not reborn in lower states because you received an empowerment. If you're reborn in a lower state, you're reborn because of what you did, the unvirtuous actions you engaged in. The point is, whether you receive empowerments or not, you must avoid unvirtuous actions and must cultivate virtuous ones in order to avoid lower rebirth. So, while it is true that not keeping Samaya does cause a lower rebirth, it is not that empowerments doom you to a lower rebirth. So therefore, you should receive empowerments. And having received an empowerment, if you practice a great deal, that's wonderful. Even if you don't, if you practice just a little bit, that's fine. And if having received empowerments you don't practice at all, you have still received and still retain the blessing of the empowerment. Having received empowerment, the next stage is to receive the instructions which liberate.
Tene tateya dorsi jitik on the siena, tatangbo, tene chitanga nyamlin on capsula, tangbo, ta sonho doji tipige, choga kandiki naya, tangbo chapsundo.
The instructions which liberate are the instructions in how to practice. All Vajrayana practices begin, for example, with going for refuge and generating bodhicitta, and then means for gathering the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom, and then various ways of visualizing or generating the yidam. These include self-generation, visualizing yourself as the deity, and front generation, visualizing the deity in front of you. First of all, the reason for self-generation is that we have Buddha nature. What we need to do is reveal that Buddha nature. We need to reveal the pure nature or pure essence of our body, speech, and mind. In order to do that, we visualize ourselves as the particular yidam, visualize the emanation and gathering of light rays, and so on. All of this is done principally in order to reveal the practitioner's Buddha nature. But at the same time, yidams are not merely internal, because Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, awakened beings, actually exist. So therefore, we also sometimes visualize the yidam in front of ourselves, which is called front generation. And then we use that front generation as a basis or support for supplication, for the making of offerings and praises, for the entrustment with our welfare, and so on. In addition to self-generation and front generation, we also sometimes visualize deities inside the vase of empowerment, done in order to create a support or receptacle for the blessing of empowerment, which is called vase generation. Now, in order to do all of this, you need to be instructed in it. You need to know what is the mandala of the practice and how is it set up, what tormas are needed, what offerings may need to be present. How do you recite the liturgy, in what order, starting with the refuge and bodhicitta and so on, and what are the visualizations and how and when are they done, and so on. All of this must be learned from the Guru so that you know how to do it, so that you know how to set up the offerings, how to recite the liturgy, and how to perform the generation stage practice itself. First, you receive instruction, and then, having received it, you actually perform the meditation. Now, the instructions you receive at this point are called the liberating instructions because it is through practice that we dispel bewilderment. It is through practice that we achieve liberation. And authentic and correct practice obviously depends upon precise instruction. Therefore, these are called the instructions which liberate. The third thing you must receive in order to practice the Vajrayana is the reading transmission which provides support. The words of liturgy and the words of instruction may be the words of the Samyak Sambuddha himself, or the words of Mahasiddhas, or the words of the root or lineage gurus. In any case, these words embody blessing. In order that the continuity of this blessing remain unbroken and be transmitted, the words are read to you, and through hearing the sound of the words themselves, you receive this continuity of blessing. In order, therefore, to engage in the pure and proper practice of Vajrayana, you must initially receive these three things: the empowerments which ripen, the instructions which liberate, and the reading transmission which provides support. When practicing the generation stage, sometimes it is practiced intensively in retreat, in solitude, and sometimes it is practiced less intensively as what is called continuing practice or daily practice out of retreat. In either way, there are two aspects to this practice: the session, practice session, and post-meditation or between sessions. During the practice session, one does the complete practice, reciting the liturgy and so forth, and does the visualization as intensively as possible. The generation stage during the session itself must have three characteristics, which are called clarity of appearance, stable pride, and recollection of purity. The first of these, clear appearance, refers to your effort during the generation stage session to generate as clear an image of the deity and so forth as possible. Now, exactly how clear this will be varies between people. Some people find it easy to generate a clear image, others do not. The point is not so much how clear it is as that you put some effort into generating that clear image. The second aspect is stable pride. Stable pride is necessary because we tend to think, even when we're visualizing ourselves clearly as the deity, I am not really this deity. This is just a game. I'm just pretending. It's important not to think that, but to think during the session of generation stage practice, I actually am this deity. Her body, her speech, her mind are mine, and so forth. It's important to understand during the generation stage session that this is not a pretense. The generation stage is actually meditation on things as they truly are. The third aspect of the actual session of the generation stage is the recollection of purity. And this is the recollection that the visualized image of the deity with which you identify is not something that is dead and substantial, like earth or stone, nor is it something like a drawn image or figure. It is the pure appearance of wisdom itself. Now, the main practice of the generation stage consists of the meditation, the visualization, accompanied by the repetition of the associated mantra or mantras. And we call this simultaneous meditation and recitation. The other aspect of generation stage practice is post-meditation, what you do when you arise from the session. Now, depending upon whether you are spending most of your time in formal meditation or not, sometimes you will emphasize the meditation session, and sometimes you will emphasize the post-meditation or between sessions practice. In either case, the key point is to not let your mind run wild during the post-meditation period. When you meditate on the deity during the session, you need to arise from the session and without forgetting the visualization entirely. Because although you may have performed good meditation during the session, if there's no continuity, if you forget the meditation entirely as soon as you arise from your meditation seat, there will be no progress, because progress in the generation stage depends upon continuity of reinforcement. Although you cannot, practically speaking, generate the same clear appearance and so forth in post-meditation as you do during the actual session, you make some effort not to forget the pure appearances you have cultivated during your generation stage practice. At the end of every session, you arise in the illusory form of the deity, often a simplified form with one face and two arms and so forth, marked at the three places by the three syllables. And you repeatedly remind yourself of this form during your post-meditation activities. This is necessary because generation stage progress depends so much upon continual reinforcement. Without that reinforcement, in post-meditation, although the meditation itself may be well conducted, there won't be progress. Through this reinforcement, then the meditation session will reinforce the post-meditation will reinforce the meditation session, generation stage will progress, and the completion stage wisdom will arise as well. Of the two aspects of the path which dispels bewilderment, the generation stage and the completion stage, this has been a brief explanation of how the generation stage dispels bewilderment. This afternoon, I will explain how the completion stage is used as a means to dispel bewilderment as well. I'm going to stop here for this morning, and while we recite the supplication for the longevity of His Holiness Jawang Karmapa and the ensuing aspiration and dedication, please pray one-pointedly.